Ladies and gentlemen, it's David Hall here from the Ideas Centre, eager to share with you some thinking around a problem exploration technique referred to as multiple cause analysis. Now, as with any of these creative problem solving techniques, the best target is one of those big problems that's been around for some time within the organisation, and whatever you've been trying isn't working, the problem won't go away. And we know, no rocket science here, that underneath that big problem there's a hierarchy of sub-problems that all nest together to contribute to that overall big problem. However, that assembly of sub-problems is somewhat inconvenient, so we tend to summarise as that big top-level problem and then put a team of experts together to try and address it. And never forget, the experts that you pull together are inevitably the creators and the guardians of the way we do things around here, the conventional and traditional thinking. And effectively what you're asking them to do is generate a single silver bullet that will solve that big top-level problem. And yet that big problem is made up of a hierarchy of sub-problems, and inevitably there will be a number of critical sub-problems such that if you don't solve this problem here, you will never solve that top-level problem. And then completely separately, there's another sub-problem here. If you don't solve it, you'll never solve the top-level problem. And maybe another one. And who knows how many of these critical sub-problems there may be. So the first stage of the multiple cause analysis is to map out that hierarchy of sub-problems on behalf of the problem owner. We're not trying to solve a problem whatsoever. What we're trying to do is to map out the sub-problems to identify the critical sub-problems that can then be addressed separately. These critical sub-problems, of course, once you've identified them, shouldn't be nested together again because they're separate issues. You need to solve them separately. And the service that a creative facilitator will provide is to map out that hierarchy of sub-problems, to expose the critical sub-problems, to then allow the creative techniques to focus on those individual lower level issues in order to crack open the bigger top level problem. Now the way the technique works is simply to map that hierarchy of sub-issues out. We tend to turn it through 90 degrees so it reads from left to right because that then tells a story. Underneath the big top level problem, this causes this, causes this, causes etc, etc. It just makes it easy to read. The technique is nothing to do with solving the problem whatsoever. The technique is entirely to do with mapping out the sub-problems, because what we're keen to do is get the best understanding of what the real problems are that we need to address. Now, many individuals tend to confuse this technique with the 5 whys root cause analysis, which is a classical continuous improvement technique, and yet the technique is quite different because of the creative facilitation aspects. Experts tend to have a very constrained understanding, kind of trapped by that world of what is the conventional and traditional thinking. And so when they map out the hierarchy of sub-problems, they take control, and effectively what you do is map out a subset of all the sub-problems that exist. They may identify a critical sub-problem, but they will inevitably miss others that lie outside that conventional and traditional thinking. And one thing we know for sure is whatever's happening inside the head of the experts or the problem owner, they cannot solve the problem. What they need is a creative facilitator, and the role of the creative facilitator is simply to provoke, stimulate, excite, challenge the thinking of the problem owner, to stretch them outside their conventional and traditional bubble. What we're trying to do is to stretch what's happening inside their heads. One thing we know for certain, never forget, whatever's happening inside their head, they cannot solve the problem. The role of the creative facilitator is to climb inside their head and rearrange the thinking. If they don't do that, they're not adding any value whatsoever. Their naivety is their greatest asset, and through their naivety, by stretching the understanding of the experts to expose other critical sub-problems, we can achieve the breakthrough that we're looking for. Now, the way the creative facilitator does this is by repeatedly asking variations on the question, what's the problem that sits beneath that? Mapping out the sub-issues and then taking it a level further. What's the problem that sits beneath each of those sub-problems, etc, etc. Now, the role of the creative facilitator involves a high degree of what I refer to as forensic listening. In one response from the problem owner addressing the question, what's the problem that sits beneath that, they may find a number of sub-problems all nested together in that single statement. And what they have to do is dissect that statement to identify the individual discrete sub-issues. Always look out for the word and. If ever you hear the word and, it's a surefire sign that you've got two problems joined together by the word and. We are rubbish at problem definitions. We're clumsy, we're messy. The role of the creative facilitator is to forensically separate out the sub-elements and read between the lines. Don't literally write down what the problem owner says. If they say that their problem involves this and that, there may be something as a consequence of those two issues that you can see as the facilitator that the problem owner is not telling you about. Feel free to identify those. The prize is the middle distance stare. If you ask the question, what's the problem that sits beneath that, and the problem owner instantly comes back with a response, the sheer speed of response tells us they're using their conventional left brain thinking, which is all very logical and beautifully laid out, all pre-wired. If the response is quick, it's coming from their logical left brain. It's effectively the current arrangement of the furniture inside their head, and all you're doing is documenting what they know already. The prize is that middle distance stare. If you push hard enough, looking for sub-issues, eventually the problem owner will say, well, hang on, I need to think about that, and give you that middle distance stare. That's a surefire sign that they're moving from the left brain to the right brain. They're now beginning to explore different ways of looking at the problem. Magic will then happen. Get your pen ready, because you then need to document it. Never ask any permission before you document anything. If you're asking as a facilitator whether the problem owner is content with you writing something down, you're inviting them to bully you. Don't forget, the problem owner is constrained by conventional and traditional thinking. They'll put a filter over what you say. If it's consistent with the way they always do things, they'll allow you to write it down. Damn that. If you're the creative facilitator, you will write down what you think the sub-problems may be. We can review all these sub-items later in the day. And dig hard. Add value by exposing hidden, all too often inconvenient issues. There will be things that the problem owner won't expose to you, won't share with you, because they've got mental blocks, for goodness sake. Your job is to dig out those creative nuggets, those fresh sub-problems that will surprise the problem owner. Occasionally the problem owner will say, well, actually, I hadn't thought of that, but you know what? You're right, that is a sub-problem. That's what you're trying to do. You are an objective, creative facilitator. Occasionally you find that the real problem is the problem owner themselves, in which case, completely freely, I would write down as a creative facilitator, the problem owner is the problem. I'd then start exploring, why are they a problem? Why can't they solve it? So be honest, be brutal in the process. It's only by doing that that you're actually adding value. Now, inevitably, this process can go on forever because you can continually ask the question, so what's the problem that sits beneath that? And map, and map, and map. My recommendation is that you constrain it in time, agree what the time limit is, and I normally reckon this is a cup of coffee technique. I reckon you can do the entire mapping exercise in 10-15 minutes tops. But always save time at the end for closing out the process. Because once you've mapped out the hierarchy, you want to finish off by simply asking the question of the problem owner, what's the real problem you've got here? And inevitably there will be a number of those critical sub-problems that pop out of this analysis. The process is finished by simply summarising those critical sub-problems that you've identified. There may be 3, 4, even more of those. But the facilitator, along with the problem owner, is then able to simply prioritise those in order of importance. An elegant technique in the hands of a skilled facilitator to identify those critical sub-issues that must be addressed in order to solve that higher order big problem.